I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Welcome to the Fidelis Leadership Podcast, a place of learning for those who aspire to leadership excellence. Here's our host, Mike Etor.
Dan Tocchini is a human performance specialist, author, and highly regarded business consultant. He specializes in change management, conflict resolution, executive leadership, sales, negotiation, and business development. Dan has over 35 years of experience in helping people navigate monumental personal and business transformations, and he's worked with many companies, large and small, nonprofits and others, from a wide range of diverse industries and specialties. I follow Dan on a lot of social media platforms lately, and it's obvious to me he possesses a wealth of experience and insights that can be of great benefit to those aspiring to leadership excellence. I'm just so thrilled he's here. Dan, welcome to the Fidelis Leadership Podcast.
Mike, thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to this. Appreciate it.
Thank you. It really is my pleasure. I came across you on LinkedIn, Dan. I followed you. You're on a lot of podcasts and all that. I'm like, okay, I got to see if I can get this guy on here, so thanks for coming. And that said, the intro, is very quick, broad. You have an extensive intro. So just tell us a little bit more. What do we need to know about Dan Tocchini personally and professionally?
Well, I grew up in an American and Italian family. My grandfather came over from the old country in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and immediately entrepreneurial. And I grew up. He opened up grocery stores, and then he ended up opening movie theaters. He opened the first talking motion picture theater north of San Francisco. I think he built the first 4 United Artists theaters. And my dad's in the theater business. My brother's does on-screen advertising. So as young kids, we grew up doing all kinds of entrepreneurial things. So I've always had a strong interest in entrepreneurial endeavors. And then I got deeply into leadership development, because if you're going to be a business owner, you better lead. You're going to be leading. There's just no way around it. You're leading your vision into being. So I spent a lot of time doing that. I grew up my mother was schizophrenic, manic depressive. So there were a lot of things that I had to learn about dealing with people, working with them in very uncomfortable situations, and working with her in a way to communicate so, I could stand with her. And that kind of trained me to deal with very conflicted situations. When I look back on my life, I realized in a very paradoxical way, she trained me to kind of stand and learn what it takes to lead something into being, right? Into reality. And, I became the go-between between her and the doctors at a very young age. I think I read my first book at 12, was called Gestalt Therapy Verbatim. And I got very interested in human performance. And I went through a drug addiction. I'm, clean now 40 years, but it was very strongly connected to kind of working through those issues at home and leaving home early. And I realized how important human relationship is, and how it is the container for all leadership. Like how we relate to one another has a lot to do with our ability to create agreement and alignment with those that we stand with.
Yeah, I love that answer. I'm a big believer in that too. Yeah. I'll throw this at you. My own personal view is, I'm a collector of leadership books. I have some a couple 100 years old. Buy them on eBay, 80 years old, 120 years old. And using the analogy of medical textbooks, a lot has changed in 200 years in medical textbooks, but the skeleton, the bones, the muscles and ligaments are the same as Michelangelo drew, 1,000 years ago. And I maintain human nature has not changed in millennia. Humans are humans. Now, our society's different, yes. And I don't think you can be even an adequate leader, Dan, without being at least adequate at the human condition, being able to take 6 people on your team, 6 different personalities, none are the same, different goals, aspirations. And it really is a lot of psychology. There's a science of leadership and then the art.
Yeah.
Science is pretty easy to learn, but the art, boy, that's where the rub is. Any thoughts?
Oh, yeah. You know, we live in a very kind of, in my experience, people want to define things so they can get their hands on them. And I
Yeah.
don't think it's possible to define leadership. I think it's paradoxical. You know what I mean? It's a dynamic that at its core, it demands balance, or if you will, you have to integrate between assertive and being receptive. It requires us to make decisive action while remaining open to feedback and differing opinions. There's just so much that we have to work with. There's the expectations to innovate and drive change, and that's juxtaposed against the need to maintain stability and reassure followers during tumultuous times. I mean, these things are something we're constantly juggling and working through, these types of relationships that are paradoxical, where we have to work. Both are true, right? There's a time when you got to drive change, and then there's a time when you got to be receptive and really listen, right? There's a time to assert and a time to receive. It's like, when do you do that? And I think that's why there's no formula that you can really apply. There's you can have principles, and I think those are helpful because then you have a framework, but you got to be ready to stand and do what's going to, make the biggest difference, both with your team and for the vision. And sometimes, you might forego what's good for the company for a moment to help somebody, an individual, and vice versa. You might say, look, you got to get up to this. We got to have, the company's got to have it. There's this tension that leaders are constantly navigating.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. We see eye to eye on that. But before I forget, I always try and level set the audience. I know you've been in this realm quite a long, 3.5 decades at least. What does your company do, Dan? Like, is it just you? Do you have other teammates? Who are your clients, and what do you help them achieve, or what problems do you help people solve?
Well, our clients are usually founders. And we're starting to expand now into enterprise work. We're taking on a new partner. We're going to be announcing him soon. He's was an ex-partner at McKinsey, and we do a lot of work with establishing teams, working with them on implementing change or making shifts when there's transitions between leadership. How to get that to be as beneficial for everybody as possible. We do, implementations when they make changes and it alters the culture. It's going to require more from individuals, or new skills and practices and processes. We're good at anticipating the kinds of relationships that need to be in place so that people want to do that they're motivated to do that. And, you got to slow down before you can go fast. You got to be able to lay those foundations in a way that opens up possibility. And we start by working with leaders to manage themselves, or to lead themselves first. Because if you can't lead yourself well, you're going to have a hell of a time leading a team. And you might be able to manipulate them, pressure them, use force or command and control, but that's going to wear thin quick.
Yeah, I agree. Great answer. I always ask people up front, the guests up front, Dan, the timeless question: leaders, born or made?
Developed, yeah.
Yeah.
We're all leading something. We all have something we want to bring into existence, whether that's a work of art, a new business, a family. You're leading something. So leaders, we learn to lead those things that mean the most to us. We learn to lead those into existence, or we live a bitter and sour life. Because when you can't, if you're not bringing meaningful production, meaningful results into your life, you're probably bitter and angry, resentful, probably reactive to what's going on around you. And I think, sadly, that is the case for a number of people nowadays. People get bitter fast. And, if you externalize your experience, if you look out and you expect the world to order itself, you're going to be quite disappointed. You're the seed that's got to fall into the ground and die some fruit and be born.
Yeah, I agree. You said one thing, and it makes me think that you agree with me. You said leaders got to learn. I also believe leadership is a learned skill. And I want to get your thoughts on this. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to. I'm going on 68 now. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to said, Mike, look, I just don't think I got it. I just don't think I can become a leader. And it's really gratifying when you see someone expressing doubts. Like I'm just telling you up front, I don't think I have a lot of talent at this. I don't really have a strong desire, but I'm going to do it. And I just don't know how good I'm going to be, Mike. It's like taking a non-musical person and telling me that I'm not only going to play an instrument, I'm going to be in an orchestra, And it's gratifying to see people like that, such self-doubt, but they knuckle under and they put in their reps and they become damn fine leaders. And it doesn't take long for many of them. Has that been your experience?
Yeah, I think there's that if you're not willing to pay the price, you're not willing to lead. And every vision has a price. In my experience, every vision has a progressive demand on me. Progressive. Like there are sacrifices I must make along the way to become the human being I'm committed to becoming, which is what leadership is to me. It's like, and a great leader is someone who can anticipate their enemy. They can see the enemy coming to the vision before it gets there, right? And I say, I've seen the enemy and the enemy's me. Like, I got to get myself out of the way first. And if I get myself out of the way, I'm going to be much better at heralding what needs to happen before the external enemies start to come in.
Yeah.
I don't think everybody's up to leading. I mean, if you're not willing to take a stand for what matters to you, you ought not be leading. You're just going to be in the way.
Yeah. Well said. I agree with that. Well, I like I mentioned earlier, Dan, I've researched you heavily for this episode. And I found some statements that you've made on other podcasts or on social media. And I'd like to give you the opportunity to share them. I'll throw them one at a time. The first one, I agree with entirely, but I'd like you to expand upon it. The first statement I saw that you've made is leadership is a sacred responsibility. Could you amplify that?
Sure. Sacred meaning it's distinct from everything else. It's separate. It's meaning if you're going to deal with people, it's sacred because you're dealing with human beings, and you're dealing with human beings in a very vital way, because if they're coming to work with you, if they're joining your team, they have dreams, aspirations, they have families that they're supporting, they have a future they're committed to, and that their ability to accomplish that is an opportunity that impacts generations to come. Like it impacts their children, their spouses, man or woman, however it looks for them, their community, their well-being, right? I think there are three primary relationships that we as leaders influence. There are three key relationships in life, and that's our career. And if we're leading somebody, we're impacting their career. There's a sense of who we are for ourselves, our identity, the person we are committed to becoming. And leaders have a big impact on that to support other people. And the other one is our family, how we're connected to the people that we love, that, our spouse, our children, our community. Those are all three sacred domains to human beings. And they've all got to be integrated, because I can be really good at my career and fail at my family, and that's miserable. Then I have no one to share with, or be great at my family and fail at my career and struggle to support my family, and that's tough. That's a hard thing. Or maybe the family's working well or at least the family's taken care of and the business is taken care of, but I don't take care of myself. And, I get into bad health and end up, suffering through my life. And I'm unable to enjoy both my family and my work because physically and health-wise, I'm falling apart. So it's a sacred stand to be a leader because there's such an impact you're going to have with people. And the other thing is a great leader knows when to follow. Right? I certainly don't lead my team all the time. I follow often because there are other people on the team that are gifted in areas much better than I am, or with people in ways that I'm not. And knowing that assists me. I know when to follow them, and I know when to really stand with them. I'm constantly looking at that, and we do that naturally on our team. Even though we know who the CEO is, we know who the CTO is, and the COO, et cetera, we're all working together to have the same thing turn out. We're all willing to follow each other if the other one's got an idea that looks like it's going to work better, and maybe they're demonstrating a competency we don't quite have yet. So we, buddy up and learn from them, like that.
Excellent answer. Well, another statement that you've made in the wild, so to speak, is that not everyone is meant to lead. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. What do you mean by that?
Well, meant to lead meaning not everybody wants to lead. And so the tendency is, if you don't, there's a couple things here. This is an interesting one. I have found the most effective leaders are the ones who resist leading at first. They understand the responsibility. They're nervous. They want to make sure that they're up for it, that they're capable of it, that they can provide what's wanted and needed. They want to make sure they're doing their best to make sure they can be responsible about the responsibility of leading. And then there are those who would just rush in where fools dared not tread. And they're dangerous leaders, and they ought not be leading. And you got to pay attention to them because they're usually the first ones to the table. And you really got to vet them. A lot of times we get excited because we see somebody who wants to take on leadership where we go, I don't know. And we've got to be careful because the question is, what's their motive and where are they coming from? And are they good? Are they emotionally mature enough? Do they listen well? Do they recover themselves well when they fail? I mean, there's just a lot to consider. So not everybody is up to leading, at least not immediately, is meant to lead immediately. But they are, if you put that on a universal basis, they're leading something into existence. The question is, what is it?
Yes, well said, well said. Well, another one that dovetails with this, there are no perfect leaders. I agree with that statement. I'm interested in hearing your insights on that one.
Well, thank God, right? I mean, perfection is a real problem. There's no such thing. There's only excellence, and excellence is the willingness to give all I got and to stand when it all fails, to continue to stand as best I can. And that's a real harrowing experience at times, right? And so, it's just kind of how it's a situation where when you take a stand, you see the impact that you have, and so that affects you, right? And so you've got to, are you able to recover from that? Are you able to work with your team? And I don't know about you, have you noticed when you lead somebody, when you lead a team, each person on the team brings something new out of you, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely.
You got to be open to that, and I think that's a way to stand in it.
Yeah, I love that. I really do, and I'd like to get your thoughts on a follow-up question. I have, to your point, I say that there's only two things that, and they're related, that a leader has to be perfect. It's my only zero defects mentality: character and integrity. You have to have rock solid character and you have to have solid integrity. You either have it or you don't. If you don't, I can't work with you. Anything other than that is trainable, teachable, coachable, and there will be mistakes. There will be mistakes. And I've seen leaders that were so impressive, especially accomplished leaders, they get a track record of victory and then they're perfectionists, and it's turned out perfectly for a long while. And then all of a sudden, the project fails or the budget is shot or whatever. And
Well, like you say, excuse me for interrupting.
yeah, sure.
But the word perfection is an interesting, it's like, what do you mean by it? Because normally
Yeah.
what it means, I found, is I have a view of how it's supposed to look, and if it's perfect,
Yeah.
it looks that way, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so that's why I think perfection is more of it's a narcissistic endeavor, because
Yeah.
it's like saying the way I think the world should be should show up. Whereas a lot of times, some of the biggest benefits are being able to embrace really the problem in a way that I find what's there that I didn't even see was possible. And that may not look anything like what I thought it should look, but it fulfills the aim.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And so, and when you talk, the character is an interesting thing, because character is the willingness to do what it takes to bring forth what you're committed to. And you may make a mistake. You may do something, say something, put your foot in your mouth some odd way. And in doing so, that becomes an opportunity to deepen your character by owning it, by accounting for it, by standing in what's there. I've made mistakes where they were character flaws. Like I remember I remember I had a couple guys in the team not want to stand with me afterwards. I made a choice that didn't work. And I don't blame them when I started to see how I contributed to it. And it contributed to me becoming more mature. And we're friends now, but it was hard at that time. And I'm the one, I thought it was them, and it turned out to be I was making the mistake. And I can see how they saw that as a character flaw. And it was one of the best things, even though it's the kind of thing you don't want to have happen often. It lasts with you, but it's that pain that causes me to think twice now. When I get into situations, I go, I've been here before, and the last time I reacted, I'm going to check myself before I wreck myself and really look at this. What am I not seeing? And I think that's a large part of trusting the process. I need to trust myself to see what's here. I think the other thing is I've got to be willing to lose whatever I think I'm going to get out of the situation, so that I can stand true to what I'm committed to. Whenever I've had a problem character-wise, it's because I've been unwilling to lose whatever I think I've been getting out of it.
Yeah.
And that's a big deal. And so one of the things I check into is, why am I doing this? What do I think I'm going to get out of this? And if I don't get that, who will I become? Who will I become with this person, this team, this situation? Right? If I don't get what I want, how will I stand anyway? And I need to be honest about that.
Yeah, well said. I think we use a little bit different words and all that, but we see eye on that. I thank you for that.
Different definition of the words, yeah.
Yeah. But we are absolutely aligned at the hip on that one. An interesting statement that you've made, and I'm really curious to see what you mean. I think I know, but I know myself and the audience definitely wants to know for sure what you mean, is the statement of what you don't face will defeat you.
Yeah. So think about a situation, if you're a listener, that you've got going on in your world right now, and with your team at home, I don't care where it is, wherever you're leading. And the situation's uncomfortable. If you face it, you risk losing something that you need or that you've been getting that's been beneficial to you, the business, your family, etc. But you see something small, it might be a small thing that is out of alignment, or it isn't quite fit. Maybe it's like somebody's not doing what they said they're going to do, but if you talk to them about it, you're worried that they'll leave and you'll end up with the work on your lap, that kind of thing. Those are the situations that if you don't face them when they're small, they're going to eat you up because they're going to get bigger. So we call it, my grandfather used to call it the shit hors d'oeuvre principle. You know, something breaks down, it usually starts small. Things break down slowly and then all at once. And we see them when they're small, but we don't do anything because we look at what we're getting from the relationship and we say, well, you know, if I say this, that might upset them, then they won't do this, or I won't get that, or whatever. So we don't say anything, and this thing starts to grow. And when I don't say anything, what I don't realize is I'm actually tacitly agreeing to the thing that I know isn't going to work because I didn't say anything. So the person doesn't know that I don't think this is going to work or that I have a problem with it. And they continue to do it because nobody said anything. So it goes from small to big. So it comes back as a sandwich, a little shit sandwich. Now, if you eat it, you can resolve it, but most people will push that away. You push that away, it comes back as a 2-course meal. And if you push that away, you've got a shit buffet, you know, a shit show. So the very things we don't face that we know aren't workable, that they're working against what we're committed to, either meaning-wise, character-wise, or outcome-wise, they're going to probably be the thing that defeats us if we let them go long enough.
Yes, I love that. I love that.
Practice getting after it early.
Yeah, yeah. That's a great answer. No, I think me and Grandpa would have got along. I like how he stated things, you know, a very direct guy, you know, evidently. So I love it. You're blessed to have him.
I was afraid of him. We were all like papas in the room, you know, even my dad. My dad said, my mom said she divorced my dad, and she said, I waited till your grandfather died just because I didn't want to face his stare. You know? So, but there's a perfect example of what you don't face. It's going to defeat you. It was a tough situation. So
I love you. Well, Dan, you often work with companies desiring to improve their culture. That's a real passion of mine, and you've got real expertise at it. That's clear. And a culture, like most things in business and related to leadership and all of that, I find, you know, some people call it an apple, others call it a fruit, other people call it a round red thing. You know, there's various definitions. Using the metaphor of a pie with different slices, what do you think are the main slices of the culture pie? What makes up a company's culture from Dan Tocchini's view?
Well, so what I'm going to first, I have a very specific description of culture, and I describe culture as language. Now, when I say language, I don't mean just words. But I mean, so for instance, if I'm sitting in a chair, if I said, well, if you look at this chair, what is it? You would say, well, it's a chair. I'd say, well, no, it's actually it's a bunch of sticks put together with some cloth. And what makes it a chair is when I sit in it. So when I sit in it, that language is chair. You know what it means, but it's a symbol, but there's an experience to it. And so culture is an experience. It starts with language. Specifically, I can hear, like when I'm talking to a team, if I want to know what they're about, what the culture's about, I know that the culture's like a table, and there are certain things that are on top of the table, and everything on top of the table is okay to talk about in that culture. Now, what's under the table are all the things that you can't talk about. All right. And so And those are usually the things that start determining the culture, because people don't want to talk about them. So they grow under the table and they start to influence the culture in a certain direction, usually in the direction of fight, flight, follow, fool, or freeze, into a survival. So people are just running around trying to survive because they're afraid to say the things that need to be said because they haven't been said for so long. So the idea is to get those conversations to the on top of the table, because once they're there and you get a bunch of eyes on them, we can resolve them. The question is, the culture is, how are people relating to the issues they don't want to talk about? That's what makes something either attractive or it puts you off. So if something comes up and I can't talk about it, it can never get dealt with until it deals with you, right? So conversation, the ability to have, to mediate, to navigate conversation, put words on situations, put words on emotions, put words on what's going on in a way that produces possibility, that invites people to resolve it rather than blame others or shame people. But how can we get to what we can learn here so that we can bring forth what we came together to bring forth? That's an effort. Then that happens in language, that happens in tradition, and it happens in the willingness to break tradition to understand more. It's like very paradoxical. So most people want to implement tradition without having the conversations behind them. Like, okay, we're going to come to work early every day, but people are coming late. Why? Probably because they're upset about something and it can't be talked about. And this is the way it works out. They're late. They turn their work in late. They have a bad attitude. And that's telling you there's a conversation that needs to be vetted so that we can learn how to navigate it. We need to get, and we may learn that some of the people that were once very powerful and productive may need some correction or may need to leave, or because it's what's next for them may not be here in this organization. Can you have those conversations in a productive and caring way? Because usually if somebody's in a culture that's not working, it's probably better for them to move on if they're not willing to shift as much as it's good for the company. We don't stop and vet that in a way that we can look at that and have those engagements. And the way to get the culture going in that direction starts with leadership, because leadership, everything flows out of leadership. So those who are leading are really, they're the trendsetters for the culture. How they relate to each other, how they relate to their reports will flow into the organization.
That's a great answer. And that last sentence, I want to make a statement. I was just talking to a prospective client today, and we were talking about cultural alignment. And I need you to come on in here, Mike, and help me get this company culturally aligned. And I said, I got a question to ask. I said, before we align, I can help you. But before I can help you align the company, I got to ask you, is your executive team culturally aligned? Because you can't ask the company to ever be more aligned culturally than their executives. So have you done that, or do I need to start with you and the executive team? He said, well, to be honest with you, you probably need to start with me and the executive team, because we got a couple that they're good people, but I'm not sure they're singing the school song with my vision and where the board wants to take us. Any thoughts on this?
Absolutely. I wonder if he's talked to them about it. And if he has, how has he talked to them about it? Do they know that how it is for him, like how it's not working for him? Or did he, was he evasive about it? Like, I'd want to understand where they are. Does he know where they are in relationship to these issues? Absolutely. If you don't start there, you'll never get to where you want to go, because that leadership team is going to keep generating the misalignment because they're working with their reports, and the reports are going to go, wow, if I want to keep my job, I've got to relate this way. And they're going to attract people who want to relate in a way that may not be aligned with the vision, but it aligns with the way they want to run their department. Right. So there's no way to change that culture without first, transform the culture. You can't do it without transforming the leadership first. And they've got to be willing to have hard conversations that they're probably been putting off up until that point.
A follow-on question related to this, Dan. Let's say that a company, their board, the CEO, and the top executives, 8-man and woman executive team. They have done these talks. They are culturally aligned and all of that. And they are going to go forth and do various things to ensure that this culture is promulgated, cultivated, and evangelized, and importantly, enforced, and all of that. What advice would you give an executive team that they're all aligned, they're joined at the hip, they've got a common vision, they got it, they're supporting it. What are they going to run into? Are there any classic prickly pears that are going to happen?
Oh, absolutely. If you're going to make a change, or you're going to start, implementing a new, making a shift in the culture, making a shift in the organization, it's a dynamic that you can count on. You know what the Pareto principle is?
Yeah.
So it's not 20% of the people produce 80% of the results. That's a kind of a nutshell version, but it's really more complex than that. But that serves to talk about the principle. So what you're going to have is you're going to have a core group of people who are immediately going to get on board, right? They're going to be like that 20%. Maybe it's a little more, but they're going to get on board and say, we're all in. Then you're going to have another probably 20% over here that says, we want to keep things the way they were internally. They don't want it to change. They want it to be the way that it is. And then you're going to have like 60% or 50%, something like that, in the middle, trying to decide which way to go. So the ones who want to keep it the way that it is, we call them, that's the levelers. They want to level the new shift back to what it used to be. They want to take the furniture, the deck furniture in the Titanic, and rearrange it and feel good about the ship as it is. So the idea is, how do you get the 60% in the middle over to the 20% that's on the change? And how do you convert or have the, eliminate the 20%, either get them on board or they go? How do you do that? And that's what a change is. And you can count on that. And you can count on the fact that it's going to get worse before it gets better. And if people, one of the biggest mistakes I've found is when people leaders try to make a gradual change. You got to go for it. Once you get the team aligned, you've got to, everything you do has got to be, we're making this change. This is what we're going to do. So,
yeah,
because gradual change doesn't work. And when you deal with the guys in the middle, people in the fence sitters, the way you deal with the 20% that are resisting will be an opportunity to communicate indirectly to the ones in the middle. So you want to give the ones who are resisting a pathway to make a shift. And if they don't, they are choosing themselves out. And if you can make that clear, that gets very clear within the organization. And then the way you engage people will show that you're standing honorably, which will move, it'll start because you're clear about where you're headed and you're not compromising and you're inviting people over and you're creating a pathway and they either choose in or out. That will begin to move people. I did an ebook called The Change Imperative that I wrote many years ago when I was doing work at ESPN when they were merging with Disney, and they distributed it to their leadership team many years ago. And I've got that on our website. If you go to takenewground.com and you go to the bottom of the website, you can click it and you get a free book. It's called the Change Imperative. And it goes through very specifically these distinctions.
I love it. Yeah, really good. I want to ask you, assuming it all goes well and a culture, these moves happen and all of that, and they often go well. Sometimes I think it ends in disaster, and people don't listen to what you just said. They ignored some classic tactics and techniques, maybe strategies. But let's say a company's got a good culture. It's like, we're good. I mean, we could always get better, but we're happy with it right now. What's your advice to leaders? How can they best defend? I use the term defend the culture. How can they defend the culture in the face of growth and expansion? Now we're we're a $30 million company with 86 employees. And now, 5 years later, we're trying to be a $300 million company. We'll probably have 400 or 500 employees. A lot of people coming from diverse cultures, standards of ethics and things like that. How do leaders defend a culture?
Well, first off, I think of culture not as it's dynamic. It's not fixed.
Yeah.
So it's deeply rooted in how you train and onboard, orient, and train leadership. Those you put into leadership, and you've got to, as individuals, when you roll out your change, you got to live it. You got to be. It's not like it's ever in. It's constantly. You're constantly dynamically changing. So there's a few things. One thing is you really got to know, and you got to train your leadership in what it means to stand and to persuade and influence people, to negotiate with people. And they've got to be able to identify what the most important problems are to solve. So there's got to be some rigor in how you've got to breathe the way you see the organization and the vision into your leaders, and they've got to do the same thing. They've got to get how vital it is. They've got to actually feel how beneficial it is to stand the way we've been talking. Right? That's a big deal. And most teams, when they get a good leadership team, they have a tendency not to articulate or bring in, like if I'm running a division in an organization and I sit down with them, am I going to relate to them the way I've been taught? I've got to do that. I've got to bring leaders up in my organization the same way I was brought up. And I probably will. If there's a rigor, there's a framework, there's a way of articulating, the values are really clear about this is what we value. Integrity, which is the wholeness of a being. It's like if something's not working, how do I integrate that into our relationship so we can have it work out? That's what I mean by integrity. How can there's nothing too difficult that any of my team, the guys I'm leading, the men and women I'm leading, there's nothing too difficult we can't talk about. And we've got to have that kind of relationship. Like, hey, let's have the bottom line conversation. Let's talk about what you've been afraid to talk about so we can look at it. Right? Trust is the willingness to talk about difficult issues and not be punitive. Like, I'm willing to learn how this is not working and what's wanted and needed to have it work. So to be able to breed that it's a very deep relationship where people aren't just tools. They're there to create and invent together. And there are values that bond us. And there's a vision that we're aiming at. And if we get everybody to aim at that vision, then it'll organize the hierarchy of concerns that they act on. So a lot of people will say they're behind the vision, but what they're really behind is protecting themselves. And you can actually see that aim. You can actually see when that aim's up. And that's worth engaging, not making them wrong about it. It's like, look, are you afraid? Do you see you can make it here? If you don't, what's wrong? You can open that up supportively. And if they can't see how to get up to it, it's probably better they move on. And if you do that well, most people will appreciate that you've got their well-being in mind as well as the organization's well-being.
Yeah.
Right. But, I'm talking about a very nuanced way of being, and most leaders want to have, here's A, B, C, I do this, I checked off everything,
Right.
You can't, this is more of it's a dance because you're dealing with a human being, and a human being is different from day to day. And how do you navigate that? And you've got a set of leaders. The way I navigate that with my leaders is the culture, and they're going to probably take some of that into the organization, and they might even invite. I know I'm doing well when my leaders are asking me for coaching on how to work with some of their team. Like, I know we're connected because they're bringing to me their own challenges without fear that I'm going to be punitive about it, but that they get excited about how we can stand together, and together we'll find what's wanted and needed. If I got a leader in that place, they can make a lot of mistakes before I'm going to go upside down. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
as long as they're authentic and I can see they're really struggling with it, I'm going to stand with them.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you, Dan. I want to ask you a question. I find this with leaders, both long tenured and novice. The culture is set, and you've got 5 team members, 55 team members, 500. If it doesn't matter, you got a set of human beings there. I find sometimes a reluctance in leaders to recognize that there may be a absolutely good individual, great human being that just not is meant for that company's culture.
Yeah.
They're just never going to agree with it, thrive in it. It's not going to bring out their best.
Right.
They're reluctant to admit that. It's like, well, if I lead well enough, we'll bring them on board. Some people will come on board, to your earlier point, but some people, it's just oil and water. It's just not going to mix. What's your advice to someone, the people that have the blinders on, that just they don't want to admit it? How do they address it? Because I think it's like, well, do I have to fire this person? And I say, well, you might, but don't look at it as fired. Look at it as doing the best thing in that person and the company's best interest. You're not meant for here. We've talked, you know?
Well, if that's the case, there'll be objective standards you'll be able to point to. You'll be able to say, I'm upset because of this, this, and this. And we've talked about it this many times, and you've said you do this, and you haven't. It really isn't working. It appears that you're choosing out. Like what I do is I set it up, and at some point I let them know, if this doesn't happen, then I know it's not going to work for you to be here. And it's up to you. Either this happens or you choose out.
Yeah.
And then, but I've created a trail of support for them, and they've probably failed along the way. And we've probably identified what some of those things are. And, you know, most people I've worked with, they usually will quit because we've had very clear conversations along the way.
Yeah.
When I haven't had those clear conversations, that's what I meant when I talked about a character problem. I had a long time ago, I had a company I ran for years, and in the end, I ended up getting lazy and not having those conversations. And I led people on because I didn't have the conversations, like everything was working, because I wasn't telling them it wasn't. And up until that many years, they were used to me doing that. Like, this isn't working. How do we get that corrected? And I had withdrawn. And I produced a lot of trouble for myself by not saying, you know, I'm done here. Let's have somebody else take my place. Instead, I tried to. It's that kind of, a leader's got to be really clear they're willing to deal with that kind of thing, or they're probably going to trash their company in the long run.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Dan, we're almost out of time, but I always want to ask this question. It's a two-sided question, two sides of a coin. You've dealt with a lot of leaders. You've worked with, reported to, had them report to you, counseled, coached. We're talking the top slice of leaders now, the top 10% of the top 10%. Based on your observations and experience, are there any traits and habits that most of the very best leaders you've ever worked with or observed seem to have in common? And then I'm going to ask you to turn the coin over and say, okay, the bad leaders, the ineffective leaders, do they seem to have some traits and habits in common as well? So let's start off with the good ones, the effective ones first.
Well, I remember as a young guy, I read Jack Welch's book, and Welch said something that really stuck with me. He said, I knew I had a successful day by the number of difficult conversations I navigated in that day. And difficult conversations, in other words, I talked earlier about a leader's got to be able to identify which conversations to have, because every time they make a change, they not only correct one thing, but they will see that every change you implement has its own set of breakdowns. So the leaders that are really good know that they're going to have breakdowns, can identify the most important breakdowns to work with, and are willing to have those conversations They're willing to get they're willing to put eyes on the problems that most people will shy away from. That's the first thing. The second thing is they're willing to stand. They're going to be hard on the problem, soft on the person. A great leader knows this is a problem, we've got to solve it. And he can tell or she can tell when they've got a problem. You can see as a leader who's jumping in to resolve it and who's shying away, who's making excuses, who's going after it. So they've got to be able to do that. They've got to be able to stand and say, this is working. Whatever this person's doing is working. See this here and stand on that. And if other people don't get up to it, they've got to make the hard choices to either, get some remedial action in there or have people leave. Right? They've got to enforce. So notice what's coming, clear about the standard, enforce the standard, and have the difficult conversations that are needed along the way. To me, those are the most vital aspects of leadership. And they got to know how to play. Number 5, know how to play. Have fun with the team so that when you do make a correction, they get who you are. Play is one of the best ways to get people to learn. Have some fun with them. Enjoy the process. Gamify. But don't get off the hard conversations. I had a guy, no kidding, just last week wrote me a letter. He said, you know what? You really pissed me off when you guys came out here. But he goes, I thought the things you were bringing up would destroy the team, and it actually brought us closer. And I just wanted to write you and tell you how much I appreciated it. And I've been continuing to do that with my team. And even though I get really scared about it, I notice that if I'm open-handed and I'm clear about what is working and not working and what's wanted and needed, and I stay on the problem and I don't make it about them or me, my identity or their identity, he goes, it's amazing what people bring to the surface.
Yeah, absolutely. What about the other side of the coin, the least effective?
The least effective are cowards and manipulative. They have a tendency to play power games. They use the power of their position to motivate people, command and control, and people will be effective doing that, but they have high turnover because people burn out. They get tired, and that's a real problem. And so coward meaning they blame a lot, themselves, others, situations, right? The minute I blame you or myself or the situation, I've now turned it into an identity conversation. Versus, this isn't working. Here's what didn't work, Mike, that you did. I don't think. What do you think? Do you see anything else that didn't work? Let's talk about that. Because if we get deep enough into the detail of what didn't work, what's wanted and needed will start to show up. And then we can talk about how we're going to have that happen.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Well, we are out of time, but I can't let you out of here without asking you the classic question, the fantasy question, I call it. Dan, if you were able to bring back one leader from the past, can be anybody, one leader from the past, spend a day with that person, pick his or her brain, who would you select and why?
I would select Jesus because he had so little and he accomplished so much. I just he was a carpenter and he changed the world, and we still talk about him. So he's probably number one for me. And I think number 2, I thought a lot it would be Steve Jobs. I'm really interested in Steve Jobs. I find him to be very intriguing. I'd love to know what went through his head and the shift that he made, what happened for him. I'd love to know about that as well. He changed as a human being.
Yes. Well, first of all, you're not the first that said Jesus, and how can you argue with that choice? And then second, you're not the first that said Steve Jobs, and a lot of people don't know that Steve Jobs got fired. I think you're referring to that. He was by some aspects, a brutally abusive boss to some people, and they fired a genius, a once in a generation genius, literally, but they fired him humbled him, threw him out of his own company essentially, and then they brought him back, and Apple's best days
Came
were
after,
were realized.
he's so generous.
Amazing.
And I think the third one is Musk, Elon Musk. He's intriguing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Think about all of them, those three. They all were willing to take a stand. They were willing to be rejected for what they care about, right? I think I think that's the only way to find what's true for you. Even if you miss, like if what you're after isn't working, like Steve, he missed, but he learned from it and he got back up and went again. I mean, that was goosebumps.
Yeah. It took character. There's no doubt about it. If he hadn't have done that, think about how many inventions, the iPhone in its current iteration, we wouldn't be seeing that today.
He wasn't even a good engineer. He's just a product genius. And he knew what the market needed. And he knew that they didn't know they needed it. So he's able to bring them what they needed, and in a way that right through what they wanted, right? It's really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, listen, it's been a delightful podcast. I'm sure someone's going to want to reach out to you, find your articles, publications. How do people contact you? Where do you hang out on social media? I'm convinced people are going to want to do it.
LinkedIn, Dan_Tocchini, Dan Tocchini, and then or Daniel Tocchini, and then Instagram, Dan_Tocchini, and then takenewground.com, which is our website. And then we have a podcast called the Naked Leadership Podcast. And we just went on sabbatical until the fall, but we've got 200 episodes. It's like a library of distinctions that we work with when we work with teams. And my two partners and myself did that for the last 4 years. So.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Well, listen, Dan, it's been a delight. A great podcast episode. It's going to be well received. And I would just selfishly ask that you consider coming back and doing another episode someday.
Oh, love to. I really enjoyed talking with you, Mike. Thank you very much.
Same here. Be well, be healthy. Thank you so much, Dan.
Ciao.
We hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Please subscribe, rate, review, and recommend to your friends. Please visit our website at fidelisleadership.com and sign up for our leadership newsletter. Until next time, remember the words of the ancient Greek philosopher Pericles.
What you leave behind is not what is engraved in stone monuments, but is woven in the lives of others.